Well, good morning everybody. My name is Griffiths from Bawnmore Coaching and Consulting. What I'd like to explore with you this morning is a little bit about the power of coaching. So first of all, I just want to tell you a little bit about why I came into coaching, what made me go into this particular area of business. And then I'll focus in on one of the particular contracts that I'm working on, which is the NDSE programme, which is the Neurodiverse strategy coaching programme. And I'll explore a little bit about how that type of programme helps people be more effective at work. First of all, though, I'll talk a little bit about neurodiversity, what it is, and how it might affect people in the workplace. Then go on to tell you more about the coaching process. So how can I actually support people who are living with neurodiverse conditions? And finally, just give you a little bit of an insight into the results that we can achieve with coaching. So why coaching? And yes, that photo was taken a few years ago, before I had to keep wearing glasses all the time. Well, when I think about the various jobs that I've done in my career, they've been quite varied. So I started off in Royal Mail in operations, which is like working in a big factory. Then moved into being a mathematical analyst, building models of operations. Jumped into training and development, and it was a big jump. Then into sales and marketing, and in the last few years, I was heading up major change programs. And when I was thinking about what do I want to do next, I thought about, well, what are the common themes that came out of all those diverse jobs? And I guess the first one is that I really enjoy working with people, being around people, supporting them. And I guess you might say I'm the sort of person who is intrigued by people's behaviours. What are they doing? Why are they behaving in that way? And also about their potential. So given the number of people I've managed over the years or worked with, and seeing how some people seem to absolutely blossom and really fulfil their potential, and others, for some reason or other, seem to get stuck and not actually achieve as much as they thought they might do. Another theme in terms of my work has been, I've always tended to be looking ahead to the future and how can things be better in the future as opposed to thinking in the past. And finally, it's always been important to me to have some sort of impact, to make a difference, to do something that's actually useful. So coaching seemed to actually match quite a few of those characteristics in terms of giving me something which is satisfying and fulfilling. So, a bit of a mouthful, but the Neurodiverse strategy coaching programme, that's one of the key contracts that I'm working on at the moment. And it really is aimed at people who are already in work and who are living with neurodiverse conditions. I've just put a little diagram on the right-hand side there of the typical neurodiverse conditions that people at work may be living with. Some of them you may be familiar with, like dyslexia or ADHD. Others you may be less familiar with in terms of things like dyspraxia. But it also includes cognitive conditions which people might acquire. For example, if they've had a stroke, sometimes the way that then their brain is working is different from before they had a stroke. And the programme that I'm part of is actually supported by the DWP and their Access to Work programme. And Access to Work is around ensuring that employers make reasonable adjustments to people to enable them to be effective in the workplace. And part of those reasonable adjustments is to offer them training or coaching. Other reasonable adjustments might be sort of specialist equipment that they use to help them navigate the world of work. So the coaching programme in itself is used to help people build skills and improve their work performance, but also to help them cope with situations that they find difficult, but which might be common at work, but which, because of the way their brains are wired, they find difficult to actually manage. Also look at how they can overcome the barriers and the issues that they might be experiencing at work, and generally speaking to increase their confidence, and in many cases to reduce their feelings of anxiety and stress because of the environment that they are working with day to day. Now, I also think with neurodiversity, the labels are great in terms of helping people get support and in terms sometimes of helping other people understand what it might mean. However, neurodiversity is such a spectrum that, say, one person with dyslexia might experience the world in a slightly different way from another person who also has the label of being dyslexic. And so with the coaching program, what we're able to do is to tailor it to that individual's need. So although a client might say to me, I have ADHD, yes, that's useful for me to know, but actually I'm more likely to say, well, so what does that mean for you in terms of the things you experience at work? What things do you find you have issues with? Because one person with ADHD may be very different to another person with ADHD. So in terms of people with neurodiversity and the world of work, here are just some areas where they might find issues with. So the first area is people often find issues with what they call the executive functions. That's things like planning and organising, things like time management. They may have a very different concept of time, which means that meeting deadlines is quite difficult for them. It also is around concentrating and being able to focus. Some people with neurodiverse conditions have difficulties with communication. That might be written communication, it might be reading, it might actually be speaking, finding it difficult to find the right words to articulate what they want to say. Socialisation, that's the way that people relate to others, the way they build relationships with people at work. And often it can be to do with finding it quite difficult to read people. So they might not pick up on the non-verbal signals that people at work actually give out. Emotional regulation. Some people may find it very difficult to control the emotions they have. So if they're frustrated, they will show it. If they're annoyed, they will show it. It can get amplified. And so a situation that you might feel is very minor might become to be a very big deal for them. And finally, sensory regulation. So for some people, they find having a noisy environment is very difficult to cope with, or whether there's lots of activity going on around them, or it could be strong smells, different lighting arrangements. It can make that very difficult for them at work. Now, none of these things actually are an indication of how effective someone is at doing the job you're asking them to do. However, there are environmental factors which might make doing some of those activities more difficult than it might be for someone who is neurotypical. So just to take you briefly through, how does coaching work? There are lots of different coaching models that you can use. This is one that we use in terms of people with neurodiverse conditions. Having agreed at the start of a coaching program, and typically they have 6 to 9 sessions. So we agree the overarching objectives, but then each session I focus in on one particular issue that they want to deal with. So I start off with actually being really specific about what outcome do they want. So what do they want to achieve by the end of the session, which might be some ways of dealing with a particular type of situation. We then delve into the situation itself. So what's going on for you at the moment? If it's something you find difficult, what's happening? What are other people, how are they behaving towards you? How are you feeling about it? What have you tried at the moment? Sometimes I find it quite, it's the first time that someone has asked them to describe how the world of work feels like to them. And that in itself can give them insights in terms of how they might want to do things differently. So we then look at choices. How might things be different in the future? What might help you? If people are stuck here, sometimes I might take them through almost like a visualization exercise. So if this particular meeting went really well, walk me through, what would it be like on a good day? And sometimes that might reveal things that they can do differently. Quite often, people have generated lots of different ways that they could do things differently, and then we focus down into actions. So what few ideas are you going to try out? And then in terms of review, how are you going to know if it works? How are we going to review whether that works, whether we need to adjust it a little bit? So each session, I take them through that process. And finally, I just wanted to leave you with some of the results from people that I've been working with recently. The top two are feedback from line managers of people I've been coaching. The first one is the client has fibromyalgia, which is a physical condition that gets worse when you're under stress, and actually your muscles tense up and you're not able to move properly. And she also had a personality disorder, which led to huge problems with anxiety and stress. But actually her potential is huge, absolutely huge, very bright young lady who's going to go places. And it was great to hear from that line manager how he'd seen her confidence actually grow through the coaching, and how, although she'd said that she felt stressed, he wasn't seeing it. So that was brilliant. Second one is had a client in his mid-40s with early onset dementia in a very senior marketing role, wanted to stay in his job as much as he could, as long as he could. So we really focused in terms of how could we help that person, how could I help him actually use memory aids and focus and concentrate so that he could actually perform at work. And again, hearing from the manager that actually those sort of things are flowing through was fantastic. And finally, this is from the actual client in terms of she has dyslexia and ADHD. We work very much on things of what would work in her work environment. Not a general technique, but her specific work environment. How could she embed it in her day-to-day working? So that for me is the power of coaching, and that's why I do it. So thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Just a random one. Do you ever find sometimes that it's not necessarily the workers that are the main issue, it's the line manager and management delivery that's the issue?
I do sometimes. So there's a lady I'm working with at the moment who is dyslexic and finds it difficult. Her job involves a process which is quite complicated. She finds it difficult to remember all the steps. So her line manager very helpfully provided her with a 20-page document of text in terms of how to do every single thing, which is next to useless. So the line manager thought that she was being helpful, but actually it made that person feel even worse, because the line manager said, well, of course, now you can do it. I've just told you everything that you need. You just refer to this document. And it's like, but it's dense text. So we sort of talked about when she has dense text, how she can use highlighters and different colours, but also how to change things to flow charts. So I'm also working with a police officer, and literally around his room he has flow charts of the key processes to help him remember what to do, because the detailed procedures, he can't take those in. So yeah, quite often it's the employer not understanding and they're not making the reasonable adjustments.
I'm also guessing it could be simple as just changing a light bulb.
Yeah.
Can't it, to help and things like that? But you need the employer, everybody to buy into that, don't you?
It is, and sometimes that changing the work environment, that can be quite difficult, particularly if they're working in an open plan office where, if you say, things like lighting is centrally controlled. Quite often, obviously, they have different coloured screen things to help actually navigate written text. There's also an issue for particularly people with who are working in offices where everything now is very computer based. Quite often, if you have something like dyslexia, looking at a screen all day is not a very good idea. Taking in information from a screen is difficult. So I have a number of clients who have a written diary in front of them, as well as the Outlook diary they have to have because their organisation says they have to show their commitments. So actually, those people are putting in twice as much effort just to manage part of they're having to do a physical diary and mental, and people don't realise that. And I'd be amazed at how much, there's so much potential in these people and the world of work can make their life so difficult. They're working 2 or 3 times harder than their colleagues to get, you know, the same results.
Interesting you say work, it's like that at school as well.
So in your role, did you have to learn about those different conditions?
I know sort of headlines about them. More it's to do with how the people actually cope with them.
Yeah.
So actually some of the techniques that I take them through are the sort of techniques I take people through on if I did management training.
Okay, so you don't have to have a great knowledge of
No.
that condition, because I suppose everybody's got them on a different spectrum anyway,
Yeah.
haven't they?
Yeah,
So you recognise more of those today than ever before. I do.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms of people.
and
Yeah,
it
it's interesting. It's people like Chris Kamara on the telly has got the is it apraxia or the aphasia, where he's got issues with speaking.
yeah.
And that came up on your slide, yeah.
So there's all different things, and also I think there are various figures in terms of what percentage of the population are neurodiverse.
Yeah.
And I've seen it goes from 15% to some studies say it's 30 to 40% of people have some form of neurodiversity. And of course, once you're aware of it, you then start to see it.
Yeah.
But sometimes actually what you're just seeing is, you know, people's behaviour. You're not necessarily seeing someone who does have an underlying
Yeah. But it might
don't
affect
know.
quite a lot of us, mightn't it? At
Yeah.
some point, when you talk about dementia, early dementia, and
yeah.
some of those conditions.
Are you saying it's up to the individual, it's up to the employee to manage up and tell their manager what the problem is, or is it up to the manager to identify that there is a problem and then seek help?
I've seen it happen in 2 ways. Sometimes when they have a diagnosis, then that allows them to go to their employer and say, I've been diagnosed with such and such, or I have this diagnosis. As an employer, you know, can you make reasonable adjustments to help me be effective in my workplace? And quite often people use that legal aspect to get support, particularly when it comes to equipment. So in terms of getting the stuff for the screens, there's software which people use called Dragon software, where if they have to write up notes from a meeting, it'll basically, they talk into the microphone, it types it up.
Right.
There's all sorts of what they call assistive technologies to help with certain aspects, and that means investment. So quite often people are desperate to get the diagnosis because then they can encourage their employer to help. But there's somewhere, working with a couple of different police forces at the moment, and the police forces, I must say, are very good at spotting people who have not previously been diagnosed as they go through their training. So because of the sort of training that police officers have, you know, I've had a couple of clients who've said, actually it was only when I got to this point in the training course, my trainer took me to one side and said, I think you might find it helpful to be assessed to see if you have ADHD or what have you. And then having had that assessment, then they can have that discussion with their line manager. But I guess what I wouldn't say is just because there are those symptoms that you might see, don't assume somebody has got dyslexia or what have you. There are lots of different things that could contribute to it. So there is a danger of having a little bit of knowledge and then assuming, oh, I'm going to say to my employee here, you know, I think you're dyslexic, because that may well not be the case. So there's a certain degree of being sensitive in terms of if you spot somebody has some difficulties, you could ask, is there a way that I can support you being more effective? Are there particular situations at work that you find difficult that we could potentially look at a different way of doing it for you?
Some of those conditions, like helping people plan their day, I think we could all, they're just general things.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a condition to be not able to plan or
Exactly,
whatever,
exactly.
so
Yeah.
But have you found it rewarding?
Oh,
Yeah.
incredibly rewarding. Some of the most rewarding
Imagine.
work.
Yeah, fantastic feedback. Yeah, brilliant.
I mean, I think the
Very
the biggest
interesting.
reward was the guy with early onset dementia. When I started with him,
Yeah.
he was holding on in and he said, my birthday is in April. If I could just stay at work until April. Because obviously with early onset dementia, actually the situation is on a slippery slope. And actually by the time we finished, he's now planning Christmas and beyond,
Lovely.
still being at work. I'm thinking, you know,
Everybody needs an Ina.
so that was...
It's nice.
So that was
It's
good.
comforting to think though, isn't it? Because it affects so many people.
It does, because it's not actually, with something like this, it's not just the person you're coaching.
Yeah.
That guy has a young family
Yeah.
that he is trying to support,
Yeah.
who would like to see their dad happy and stress-free as long as they can. And initially the stress of trying to cope at work was spilling onto absolutely everything in his life.
Yeah, well it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because work's such a big part of
It
life,
is,
isn't
yeah.
it?
But I think having a diagnosis at least gives you a starting point with employees and things, and there are laws around it as well.
It is, yeah.
So, but I think because my son was diagnosed with Asperger's, it
Mhm.
was a lot better because he understood
Yeah.
what the problem was.
Yeah.
And then you then get access to support, and it helps
Mm.
them understand the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it helps them understand as well why they might have looked at things differently from other people.
But it also helped me understand certain things that you look at teenagers and think they're lazy. Well, because he has lots of traits of ordinary teenage boy things, and then there's
Mm.
other traits, and it helps you unpick
Yeah,
how they see the world differently.
yeah.
That's very good.
Right.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.